Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week. It's warm today here in Colorado. So, this book, the work of art, I think it's backwards as we get videotaped, was on my radar for a while. I think I even bought it. I hadn't read it yet. And then Julia, thank you, Julia. She said, "Hey, this is a few months ago." She said, it's good. You should look at it. So I did, and it is. So I wanted to just share the introduction with you all. It's really about all kinds of aesthetic making, and he interviews all kinds of people doing all kinds of things, not just visual arts, all kinds of stuff, film, writing, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of creative activity. But we'll start. And then he starts like this. So this is going to be in two parts. It's long, the intro. It's not terrible, but so he starts. He's got a picture, and I've got the pictures in the. Are we recording? We are recording. I've got. I'll put the pictures in the PDF. So how does this turn into this? That's the building of the Guggenheim in Bilbao in Spain. Good question. So I was standing in the gift. This is Adam Moss, and he's like a big deal. He was a big deal editor, magazine editor, all kinds of stuff. I was standing in the gift shop of the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain, flipping through the book Gehry Draws. Right, Frank Gehry was the architect. When I came across the scribble you just passed a couple of pages back. It was more or less the first intimation the building's architect, Frank Gehry, had of the museum, which became an architectural icon the moment it was built. It's been compared with a boat, a fish, an artichoke, and Marilyn Monroe. I happen to love a doodle, and the scribble was a compelling little doodle in its own right. But what was so striking to me was how much it resembled the cockamamie and extraordinary structure I had come to Bilbao to see. As I looked at the scribble and at the walls, and then back again at the drawing, an image out of a Pixar short popped into my head. The doodle shimmy to life to become the building it imagined, which now surrounded me. Gehry talks about these scribbles, his word for them, and there are many, just like this one, as his way of thinking aloud, quote unquote. And for a brief moment, I was right there with him when he had that first electric thought envisioning the place. It was one of those fleeting associations you hardly register. I moved on. And yet, I had a similar experience when I was still upstairs in the museum at an exhibit of Alice Neel paintings that had been traveling around the world. Among them was a picture of a man named James Hunter called Black Drafty. James Hunter. And that's this picture. And that's in there. All the pictures will be in there. Yeah. As the story goes, Hunter came for a sitting, then went to Vietnam. He never returned to her studio. Neel looked at what she had applied to the canvas in that one meeting and declared the painting finished. I'm nuts about a lot of her work, but on that day I was tooling around the galleries. I kept circling back to this painting. I was stuck on it. The interrupted portrait of Hunter was haunting. What really got to me was the implied portrait of Neel, the artist, painting the picture. So there I was with her, experiencing the sitting as she experienced it. And then it happened again. A day or so later, I was in Madrid at the Prado Museum, and I saw this painting by Velázquez, one of the many court portraits of Philip IV. It's hardly the most interesting of his works, but see where you can make out a trace of where it looks like the artist initially posed the king's leg before fixing it. Down here on the bottom is little red circle. I felt as if I'd discovered a secret. It came as a gift to view Velázquez as mortal, making a decision and thinking better of it. He's got a little footnote. That's what I thought I was seeing. As I later learned, scholars have determined that in this painting, the leg was the vestige of an earlier work he had painted over. Still, it happens also to be true that Velázquez frequently left marks from his mistakes and second thoughts on his canvas. He's well known for it. Okay, so it turns out that that wasn't that. I've long been attracted to this sort of artifact of artists caught in the act of making art. If you look around, you can find them in corners of the internet, academic websites, auction house offerings, fanzines. They show up in the occasional exhibit or as a sideshow in museum retrospectives. There are many types: tossed off sketches and more considered studies, unfinished work, meandering notes to self, scribbled lyric fragments, marked up text, mad outlines. I find them almost inexplicably beautiful in all their genres. Some of my interest is aesthetic. I appreciate a crude hand. I can see the artist in it. I respect the honesty of the specimens, knowing that they were not meant for me to see. They're forensically interesting, often revealing stages of thinking. But what I find most satisfying about them is the way they seem to embody anticipation. They're full of portent, more verb than noun. Also, poring over them gives me the same charge I get from reading the letters and journals of famous people. There are nosy pleasure in that, and I've often thought, in passing, that someone ought to put these kinds of documents in a book. So, to begin with, that's what you're holding right now. But that's not really what this book is about. The true value of unbaked scrawls and sketches and whatnot is a window to an artist's process. Process is an ugly sounding word, pedestrian jargon for the inherently wondrous act of creation. But it describes a method by which a thing evolves, which has always had a hold on me. For over 40, we got some other stuff here. Proust, Bob Dylan. For over 40 years, I was an editor of magazines mostly. New York, most recently, the New York Times magazine before that, and also a short-lived weekly called 7 Days. Particularly in the kinds of general interest magazines I was editing, you could follow your curiosities any old place. That was the job description. And mine was often the how of anything. While a childlike interest, perhaps, naive and open-ended, each how toppling into another, it was also opportunistic. I published a lot of what is known as process journalism, origin stories especially, which could then be fashioned into narrative. As an editor, what I liked about these stories, beyond their answers to my questions, was the classic structure of them, each inherently dramatic, starting with nothing and ending with something. Cultural procedurals were especially good material. Years ago, I assigned a story on Stephen Sondheim, in which he explained in thousands of words how he wrote a single song. That was pretty great. I published the story on the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao that compared the building with Marilyn Monroe. I traced the evolution of songs and novels and soap opera arcs. As an editor and as a reader, I found the story of how creators create irresistible. And that interest wasn't restricted to the page. When I could get a closer look, I took advantage of opportunities that came my way. One day I was invited to visit the set of the HBO political satire Veep. There I watched David Mandel, who ran the show, tune a joke. Its punchline was a Jewish holiday. He kept barking out variations, landing the joke on different holidays. Yom Kippur or Simchat Torah, which is funnier, improving it steadily until one turn fell flat. That's when he knew he had gone too far. All that for a throwaway joke? I was mesmerized. You'll see, I talked to Mandel about that later on, but I mention it here to say that I've always been a freak for the zealous pursuit of the better, especially where culture is concerned. I love the story of it and also the motive. So that too is what this book is. A celebration of the art that happens when instinct meets rigor. But it isn't only that either. How long has this been going? I don't even know. Should we keep going? Oh, okay. We got a couple more pages for a good kind of midway. All right, we'll keep going. I'm a painter. I feel ridiculous saying that. But when I quit my magazine job, sometime before that trip to Spain, I decided to try my hand as an artist. It wasn't entirely abrupt. In my work, I always found it satisfying telling stories and photographs and graphics and drawings. And in spare moments, a whim at first, I picked up a paintbrush to try making images myself. I had no background in art at all, but I liked it and I dabbled. Then I left my job and I began to paint more seriously. That was the beginning of my torment. I just wasn't very good. After I learned a few skills, I could paint all right, basic stuff. My drawing got better. I knew my way around a color wheel. I could represent in a primitive way. And representation was what I was after, mainly because I didn't have the courage to be more adventurous. If I were to try to describe what sort of painter I was, I guess you could say I was a figure painter with a distorting style, much like Alice Neal in my fantasies. But the distortion wasn't always exactly deliberate. I just couldn't do any better. Decent paintings sometimes emerged, but they seemed almost by accident. And they were accidents I couldn't necessarily recreate. I was conservative. If one part of a painting showed promise, I would protect it and put the rest of the painting at risk. Sometimes I could get something going and then tentatively feel emboldened to try something new. My paintings weren't loose enough. I kept trying new ways to break the bad habits I was already picking up as a new painter. And then fall back, and that would scare me. So I would retreat to what I knew, which meant resuming the bad habits. As a result, I made the same painting over and over again. I got frustrated easily and gave up easily, never knowing when to persevere or surrender. I had no faith that I could make the painting I wanted. If I stopped midway, that ideal painting could at least remain intact in my mind. If I painted it and painted it poorly, I'd be crushed. You can see that these are all problems more of the head than of the hand, though there were plenty of technique issues as well. Basically, it all seemed impossible. And yet, though it sounds horrible, it wasn't entirely. It was like a bad affair. I loved it, even as it tortured me. And at least it consumed me. In spite of my troubles, I kept painting. Though I pretended otherwise, I really was ambitious. I wanted to be good. And when I was at my most exasperated, I found myself asking the same question I had asked as an editor. How does anybody make art? Okay, I'm going to pause there. That's enough. I mean, at least enough I could get further, but this is good. I'm going to pause there. We will continue next week. I'll send out the PDF Hope you're well. Oh, holidays. Oh no, we've got another one before. I don't know. Where are we? Yeah. Good happy holiday season. Happy shopping. happy making. Happy holiday making. All right. Hope you're all well. I'll send this out. Take care. Bye-bye.